ethos of educational practice that nurtures and cultivates democratic life for all. The underlying purpose of education embraces the Freirean notion that the greatest humanistic and historical task of the oppressed is to liberate themselves. Community empowerment is a dialectical process. What that means here then, that there must always remain a tension between the needs of the individual and the larger social needs. This tension permits for the individual participation in the evolution of a collective process of community self-determination that does not degenerate into moral relativism, but rather is informed by a humanizing moral compass guided by love for self, love for others, and love for the world. It is this dialectical tension that can also thwart absolutism driven by apolitical and ahistorical notions of the world. In this vision of leadership, critical dialogue is the political means for an empowerment and establishing participatory community. This entails then a number of pieces: a purposeful communication that leads to self-determination, political action, a collective process of conscientization, communal labor that supports the development of solidarity, and an open, humanizing process of inquiry. Any situation in which men prevent and women prevent others from engaging in the process of inquiry, this is one of violence. To alienate humans from their own decision-making is to change them into objects. So much of what we're talking about is how do we come to our classrooms, how do we work in our communities where we refuse to be passive objects of policies and practices that work against our own interests. As would be expected, the critical pedagogical principles of conscientization or social consciousness defines the ongoing aim and practice of critical leadership. This requires us to remain ever vigilant in our continued evolution as cultural workers, as we seek to practice with a sense of critical social consciousness. And when Freire talked about critical consciousness, it is a political phenomenon, but it's a political phenomenon that has to happen in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits. I always will come back to that. It is not a one-dimensional understanding of consciousness. This points then to personal consciousness of one's individual conditions and social location, social consciousness of the conditions that are within our communities, that impact our communities, understanding how these dimensions intersect, awareness of how power relations inform cultural, political, social, and economic conditions, thus strategies for intervention, and embrace our individual and social responsibility as world citizens and subjects of history. However, none of this is possible without a process of critical, democratic negotiation, where the dialectical tension between authority and freedom are engaged organically within the actual context where these tensions arise. The dialectical tension between authority and freedom is simply a part of the human condition. This will always be there. This issue around freedom and authority, it will always be there. About this, Freire insists, though, that it is not possible to have authority without freedom or vice versa. Hence, we must be willing to practice a critical form of leadership that demands our full presence beyond vulgar competition, infantilizing micromanagement, or egotistical ambitions and pursuits for institutional recognition. In other words, why do we do this work? We have to do this work beyond any award that anyone's going to give us, beyond any recognition, because often, I'll tell you, having been in this work for 35 years, I can tell you that there are some difficult, tough-ass moments, because there's no other way to put it. There are some tough moments, stuff you just have to struggle with and you have to be willing to be steady with. And the way that we're steady is by being clear about who we are, what we believe, and how we are grounded, and how we bring it together in community. As such, a critical theory of leadership calls for personal vigilance and political groundedness within the context of our communal life. These critical qualities assist us to read the world more accurately, particularly with respect to the ideological intersection at work in all organizational structures. We can think of this theoretically as an axis relationship, where there is an intersection between the continuum of tyranny and powerlessness on one hand, and the continuum of absolute authority and absolute freedom on the other. It's never all the way one way or another. People find themselves in different places, and this is important because the struggle for social justice and community empowerment precisely is where we find people in organizations that are going to exhibit response patterns across these continuums, depending on their political coherence, on their grounded experience, on their cultural worldview, and the personal and communal depth of their commitment to social justice. So, will people have your back? You know, will they have your back? Will you have their back? All of that in terms of this work has to do with your understanding and your coherence as a person who is committed to this work. In concert with Freire's philosophy, engaging the cultural context is essential to our efforts, and I spoke about that earlier, in that often the hegemony of the dominant worldview functions systematically to marginalize other ways of being, and the phenomena has often prompted Freire to argue one cannot expect positive results from an education or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the people, the world view held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. And I think that that issue of good intentions, being well-meaning, you know, some people, they're well-meaning, but the consequences of what they're doing is actually destructive. And so part of the reason why we need dialogue is so that we find the ways to be able to look at the ways in which people act, the way in which people move forward in organizations and institutions, so that we might be able to reinvent those structures in ways that bring us to a greater sense of our humanity. Another significant dimension, then, of a critical theory of leadership is a commitment to relationships of solidarity. This issue of solidarity is absolutely key in our work. And it needs to be nurtured through the integration of our human faculties, the evolution of political grace. Political grace, for me, is that collective power that's generated by those who are committed together to struggle for democratic life. We seek the organic integration of our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. Moreover, given its emancipatory purpose, revolutionary community practice requires an exercise as an integral process, one in which our minds, our hearts, our bodies, and spirits are welcome in the active service of liberation. That integral dynamic that generates the conditions for political grace to touch our communal exchanges. And in a lot of ways, this issue of political grace is that really that love we feel when we work with others. You know, I mean, the committee, the students, last night we were having dinner together. And the one thing that struck me were just the conversations that were going back and forth, and a kind of a warmth and a kind of connection that they felt with one another. And I would say that that connection is because they have labored together, because they have struggled together, they've worked together, they probably fought together, for all I know. Because generally you can't do the work without fighting. I'm one that believes that good fighting is good. I mean, there's good ways to fight. This is key then to our understanding of the world, in that it is precisely the fragmenting and fracturing of our human faculties that thwarts our political agency, as the culture of consumption and abstraction steers our passions away from our, towards these individual pursuits and manufactures our desires in the interest of profit. I mean, one of the things that I always ask people is, before you buy something, think, do I really need this? Do I really need to spend the money on this? You know what? We're in so many ways, our desire, all of those things that you feel like I just gotta have, we have to recognize in a lot of ways there's a lot of brainwashing that goes on in terms of making us think that we need a hell of a lot more than we do. And the truth of the matter is our real needs are so small, and often the things that we need most are even free. The love and the connection that we need as human beings, that doesn't cost us anything. The only thing it costs is our willingness to be present, fully present to one another. To close, I want to quickly then offer two sets of indispensable qualities of critical leadership. This is first tied to an ethics of political practice for social justice, and these include, very quickly, the knowledge of the micro and macro systems and their relationship, the knowledge of self-contradictions and personal struggles, to recognize the link between culture and power, the ability to read power, both formally and informally, which is a major piece of work that you should be doing in your classrooms, conscious of language use and relationship to power, emphasis on voice, on democratic participation and collaborative decision-making, consistently move towards dialogue, and act critical authority in the interest of democratic life, politically strategic. We have to be politically strategic about what we're doing. We have to choose our battles wisely. We can't fight everything, at every single situation we fight, because it will talk about fatigue. We will be fatigued if we had to, be challenging every single situation that we have to deal with. But we have to choose our battles wisely. Commitment to solidarity and community of self-determination. The political change is understood as part of an ongoing process of life. We're never going to get there. The revolution, we're not getting to a revolution. The revolution is in our everyday life. It has to be every single day, the way we live, the choices we make. That in there, inherent in those ways of being, has to be a revolutionary consciousness. We must embrace a historical long view of revolutionary struggle for social justice. Human beings have been struggling for their freedom centuries and centuries and centuries, and will continue centuries and centuries. And for that reason, we have to understand our work as a larger political struggle. It isn't just about our little piece, our little drop in the ocean. We're part of a much larger process. Here, Freire reminds us that the oppressors do not favor promoting the community as a whole, but rather selected leaders. So always find ways to engage as a community. The second set of slides are what I call this indispensable qualities of critical leadership that is tied to an ethics of personal struggle for social justice. And this, again, speaks to being self-vigilant in our own attitudes and behaviors towards ourselves and towards others and towards the world. To be committed to the common good, tú eres mi otro yo, to echo the earlier poem. Confidence and humility. And I want to just, this notion, we can just say it glib, tú eres mi otro yo. But think about it, if I engage you knowing that you are my other me, if I engage you in that way, if I have that level of honoring and respect for you and value for you, what a different type of relationship we're going to have. So it's more than just, kind of a nice little saying. It has to do with an ethics of how we come to relationships. We must have confidence and humility. We have to be comfortable with knowing, but we also have to be comfortable with not knowing. Faith and respect for others, present an engaged style of communication and participation, courageous and thoughtful when challenging others, bring a collective sensibility to our decision-making, impatiently patient is what Freire would say, to respect the process, commitment to living, to working and loving with integrity, and I say, and dying with integrity. Focus on nurturing relationships with others rather than being right. It's not so important that I am right. It is important that I'm willing to be with you and struggle with you. Grounded in a revolutionary love, anchored in justice and our humanity. Forgiveness for one's own and others' limitations and mistakes. I can't tell you how many mistakes I've made in my life. And part of the struggle for me is learning how to learn from my mistakes, to have the humility to say, man, I really, I effed up. I just totally messed that one up, And ask forgiveness from those that I may have inadvertently hurt. Compassion for the struggles faced in our efforts to become more fully conscious. All of us are struggling in our own way to become conscious. Let's have respect for that in our lives. Respect for the preciousness of all life, and to embrace humor and joy and the central dimensions of our humanity. We need all of that in our struggles. In The Heart of Men, Erich Fromm argued, it is on the assumption that humans are sheep, that the great inquisitors and the dictators have built their systems. More than that, this very belief that humans are sheep and hence need leaders to make decisions for them has often given leaders the sincere conviction that they were fulfilling a moral duty, even though a tragic one. In contrast, a critical leadership for social justice and community empowerment encompasses a deep commitment in theory and practice to struggle with rather than for. In concert with this, Freire argues that the more radical the person is, the more fully he or she enters into reality, so that knowing it better, he or she can transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, to see the world unveiled. This person is not afraid to meet the people or to enter into dialogue with them. This person does not consider himself or herself the proprietor of history or of all people or the liberator of the oppressed, but he or she does commit himself or herself within history to fight at their side. May we build unity together upon these words in all that we do and say. Thank you.